I think it's a myth, and a lot of historians do as well, that science and religion are necessarily in conflict. I think as a final codicil, I would say it depends what religion you're talking about. I'm talking about the Judeo-Christian worldview because science conflicts with a lot of religions.
Are science and religion in conflict?
I don't really think so. And I've had that impression actually for a very long time, in the sense that when I was at school, I started reading C.S. Lewis. My father gave me some of his books. And it was very interesting reading those books because his take on the history of science, which was based on Alfred North Whitehead actually, was, to quote more or less, men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. That fascinated me. And a little bit more research showed me that if you take modern science, I'm not talking about medieval science, modern science, and you start with people like Galileo and then you move on to Kepler, Newton, and so on, these people were all believers in God with slight variations on it. And it seemed to me there was a pretty close connection between their theism and their approach to science. And in general, historians of science. So sometimes I say to people who ask me that question that I'm not remotely ashamed of being a scientist, if you count mathematicians as scientists, and a Christian, because arguably it was the Judeo-Christian worldview that gave me my subject. So I think there's a deep resonance there. And I do think there is a conflict, though, just to explain a little bit further, but it's not between science and faith in God. And I often illustrate this by thinking of the Nobel Prize in Physics. Because take, for example, Peter Higgs, who won it, Scotsman, atheist, brilliant physicist. And then there's another person I know, Bill Phillips, an American Nobel Prize winner for physics and a Christian. And what that tells me, Alex, really is this, that their difference isn't in the realm of physics at all, or science, it's in worldview. And I see a real conflict between the theistic worldview and the atheistic worldview, and there are scientists on both sides. We take that on board, we can make a more sensible exploration of this whole, well, I think it's a myth, and a lot of historians do as well, that science and religion are necessarily in conflict. I think as a final codicil, I would say it depends what religion you're talking about. I'm talking about the Judeo-Christian worldview because science conflicts with a lot of religions.
What a statement, huh? What a statement. So he brings in two different physicists. Their disagreements is not in the physics. Their disagreement is in worldview. A lot of people miss the point on this. A lot of people kind of ignore the fact that the issue they have with one another, I'm just generally speaking here, the issue people have with one another has to do with your worldview. And so what is a worldview? I mean, it's very important for us. It's very important for us to define what a worldview is. A very simple way of me putting kind of a definition to worldview is something like, your worldview is the filter in which you view the world through. Your worldview is the filter in which you view the world through. And so if you have an atheistic worldview, you're going to view the world in a certain way. And if you're a Christian, you're going to view the world in a certain way. If you're a Buddhist, or you're a Hindu, you're going to view the world a certain way. So for example, consider the issue of suffering. If an atheist goes through suffering, they might say, well, it's reality. It is what it is. Kind of, it's whatever. I'm going to make the best of it. And then go through the suffering. Try to find meaning and purpose in all of that. If a Christian goes through suffering, they're going to view it a bit differently. They're going to ask questions of purpose. Why is God allowing this? Does God allow suffering? Is all suffering from God? So these are very different sorts of questions that the atheist doesn't care about and doesn't ask. If a Hindu is going through suffering, he might be considering issues of reincarnation. Am I being punished? Karmic kind of retribution. Am I being punished here? Is that what the suffering is? And then they're going to interpret it differently. That is your worldview applied. And so Professor John Lennox is onto something extremely important here that a lot of people look past. People start disagreeing with each other when it comes to, can you do this? Can you do that? Should you do this? Should you do that? Or shouldn't you do that? And without having established what their worldviews are and how their worldviews are in contradiction to one another. So it's extremely important for us to realize that we all have worldviews. One of the things is that people don't think they have worldviews, and they have worldviews. And they don't know how to kind of juggle through that. Usually people have inherited a worldview. And so therefore they act on it without realizing they've inherited it, or they're borrowing worldviews or parts of worldviews to make sense of their reality. So excellent point by Professor John Lennox there.